Hey, welcome everyone. My name is Ville Österlund and I'm founder of Leanlab. I'll be hosting today's session. Today we'll walk through how to create meaningful segmentation based on real customer research and how to put it in action in the age of AI for marketing and product teams. Our aim today is really to help you to walk away with knowledge on how to chat with your segments in real time and create personalized messaging and products. Our speakers today are Stuart Slavicky. He's a Deputy Director of Marketing and Communications at College of Optometrists in the UK. So he's been leading the transformation on how the college understands and communicates with its members, and he's going to share that journey with us today. Hi, Stuart.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. And then I have a second guest, Nina Urala. She's a business lead at our sister group company, Digitalist Experience, and she's one of the leading experts in customer segmentation research. And Nina, you have a PhD in consumer and sensory science, so you've been putting your back into it, so congratulations. And today, Nina will detail the research steps that we took to build the segmentation for Stuart and his team. Nina, hi.
Hello. Hello, everybody.
And finally, before we kick things off, the session is going to be interactive. So we have a couple of polls and a Q&A at the end of the session. So please post your questions in the Q&A box that you can see on the top right corner, and we'll aim to answer some of the questions at the end of the session, or then we'll follow up with you guys with all of our answers. So do drop your questions along the way, and we'll try to address them at the end of the session, or we'll follow up later. Right, let's start diving into today's session. What we mean by segmentation. Let's frame this so that we know what we'll talk about today specifically. I think there's segmentation that kind of can be layered maybe on three kind of layers. If you imagine it being a pyramid, at the bottom you have demographics and life stages, age, gender, and so on. And that's probably where most organizations start with. It's widely available, in your CRM, in your customer data. But as Stuart will show you in a moment, it's weakly predictive. Knowing someone's age doesn't really tell you what they need and what you need to do about it. And then in the middle, you have the transactional and behavioral layer, meaning purchase history, usage patterns, and so on. That also tends to sit in your CRM or in your ERP or in some of the systems that you have. And it tells you what people do and when they do it. Super useful. It's much better than just being tied down into demographics. But again, it doesn't explain the why behind the behavior. So at the top of the pyramid, you have the needs and motivation-based segmentation. So usually we talk about 3 to 6 personas or archetypes built through real research. So this layer really tells you what tells you why your customers act and think the way they do. And it's the hardest to build because it actually requires research with real people, with real customers. But at the same time, it's one of the most critical things that you can do because it drives your entire communications and product strategy. So having that in place is absolutely critical. Lots of organizations sit somewhere in the bottom 2 layers. They know who their customers are and what they buy, but they struggle to execute the needs and motivation top layer. And that's where our focus will be, on that top layer, because it gives direction to everything below it. Right. Before I let Stuart to go on stage, let me do a quick poll on, where you think you are in your segmentation today. You'll be able to take the poll. We can take a look at the results. So we have a few answer options there. We have needs-based segmentation. We have segments that are mostly demographic. we did the research, but they were not actually using it. And then we have no formal segmentation. Data is coming through. Interestingly, a lot of customers, a lot of you guys on the call seem to have segments, but they are mostly demographic. Some of you guys have the needs-based segmentation in active use. So round of applause for you. And, you know, some of you guys have tried and failed in terms of, you know, executing the needs-based segmentation, but they are hard to swing into action, 22%. So Stuart's piece on using the AI will be particularly interesting for you guys. So let's get things rolling. I'll hand over to Stuart. Take us through kind of where you with the college when you started there.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Ville. So, yeah, I'm going to skip back to 1960, obviously before my time at the college, way before. But at that point, we're in Harvard, and Theodore Levitt has just told an audience that people don't want a 1/4-inch drill; they want a 1/4-inch hole. And then 50 years later, if we move forward, you got Clayton Christensen, who then builds an entire framework around that idea, which is the jobs to be done. And essentially what we're saying is stop asking what your product does and actually start asking what your customer needs it for. And ultimately, that's an answer you will never get from age, gender, or hair color. So when I joined the College of Optometrists last year, I found our research was thin. Communications were built around career stages, students, newly qualified, established optometrists. There had been some work done earlier on younger members, but essentially it lumped their views into one tidy group. And really what you're looking at was demographic research, which was just dressed up as insight. Now, I'm not saying demographics aren't useful. They are. They tell you who your members are, but really they tell you nothing about what they need from you. And, you know, if you don't know that, then you're guessing. And I like to illustrate this point a little bit further with this example. Now, here we have two people who on paper are identical, right? So, you know, they're both female, they're both born within a month of each other, they're both mothers, they both speak English, they're both wealthy, both princesses in their own right. And while demographically they are incredibly similar, they are very, very different. Because this shows exactly what the demographics fail to pull out, those motivations and behaviors. And that's why I always take kind of any research which is kind of based on Gen Y or Gen Z or Gen Alpha or wherever we are now, you know, kind of with a large cellar of salt. So to illustrate what this means in real terms at the college, what I'm going to show you is let you into some improving NPS scores that we had. We had a little dip during COVID here, but essentially we had 2 years of consecutively improving NPS scores, which were really great, really, you know, wonderful to see. Pat on the back. Then we broke that down by age group demographic. So suddenly you see this kind of this dip where at the start of their career, when they're quite young, they're incredibly highly engaged, really positive. Then it sort of falls down a little bit, and then it starts to pick up towards the end of their careers as they get older into the sort of the 50s and 60s. And that drift is interesting, you know. What you saw as an aggregate score doesn't look so healthy, and it starts to raise a lot more questions. So why are younger members scoring higher? What's driving the recovery in older age groups? What is happening in that midlife phase? Is it career stage? Is it life stage, or something else entirely? Something that age alone really can't tell us. And again, that is the problem with demographic data. It shows you the shape of something without explaining exactly what it is. So in October, we commissioned a 2-phase research project with Leanlab and Digitalist, which involved 3 months of deep qualitative and quantitative work to find out exactly what was going on, what can explain what our members are wanting from us. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Nina to explain exactly how we did that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stuart. Let me give you a quick walkthrough. We use two-phase approach. First, qualitative research and then quantitative survey for segmentation. And this sequencing with qual and quant research is usually really critical in order to build credible, approachable, and also relevant segment descriptions as the outcome. And in the phase one, we conducted qual research with approximately 50 college members across different profiles. And they really had different career stages and different practice types, and their levels of engagement with the college varied. So we got really good group of people attending the qual phase. And in this phase, our goal was not to count opinions, but to understand the underlying motivations and possible frustrations and jobs to be done that shaped members' relationship with the college. And as I said before, this qual phase was critical because it also gave us the language and the frame for the quant phase. And you really can't build a good segmentation survey without first understanding what questions to ask, what to measure, and how to build a credible data set. And these have to come from real members with their voices, not just your own assumptions.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just add briefly. This is the Leanlab platform, what we interchangeably call customer lab or customer advisory board. But the beauty here is that the members then were able to participate async across the UK, so they didn't require specific time to join in for qual. They could just take part in qual discussions, without anybody kind of requiring to be in the same room. Mm-hmm. And was it so that your team run 6 different discussions looking at covering, benefits of memberships to expectations to the future? Mm-hmm. And what we are always seeing through these private customer labs or advisory boards is that the depth of feedback is incredible because they are your customers, they are committed to your relationship, and they are super keen to share deep insights and thoughts on their experiences. And that's something that takes a lot of companies by surprise when they start lean labbing for the first time. This then really became the foundation of the segmentation that you guys did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Thank you, Ville. And once we had this really nice and rich pool of verbatims and opinions, we got nice qual insights and themes from the members and who they really are. And we designed a structured segmentation survey and deployed into college full member database using the Leanlab platform. Again, another feature from the great platform we were using. And we were aiming approximately 500 members to be responded, but we were super surprised to get over 650 members to be who replied the survey. And the survey itself focused on behavior and attitudinal statements, not demographics. And we asked things like how members engage with professional development, what they value most from the membership, and how they see their career trajectory. And we also measure their attitudes towards technology and AI. And when the data was collected and the data set was ready, we analyzed it by using statistical methods, and our cluster analysis revealed 4 distinct groups of members. And each of them had a different relationship with the college, different expectations, and critically a different job to be done. And here we can see the 4 archetypes or personas or groups we found. So each had uniquely different focus. Briefly, the navigators need guidance and support to find their path. And the climbers, they are driven and they want tools to advance. The balance seekers, in turn, value their profession and expect the college to fight for it. And the ever curious are passionate about everything, learning, technology, innovation, and they want to be seen as leading professionals. And I think Stuart can add a few words.
Yeah, thanks, Nina. Yeah, I mean, what was really fascinating, and if we think of them as kind of the archetype, i.e. the center of that that kind of persona world, is we've got behavioral patterns here, not just fictional people. And this is nothing, this is something that Career Stage would never have predicted, which persona someone belonged to, because you could have a newly qualified optometrist or a 35-year-old veteran all sitting within that same persona. For example, one was facing a new career and was unsure of what direction they're going into, what path they want to find, trying to navigate that career, whereas the other one could be looking towards the end of their career, moving into retirement, looking to wind down their hours, but again, they don't know which way they're going. And actually, you could suddenly find these similarities within these groups, again, kind of completely unrelated to their actual to their age or their career stage.
Yep. And we will also our journeys
we lost Nina.
So the personas helped us to understand the journey and how it should be communicated throughout their own path or their own personas. So the journey itself broadly was the same: onboarding in early career, engagement in mid-career, and activation in later phase. But the messages and the tone of voice, and especially the value proposition, they need to be designed differently to each group.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you dropped out there a little bit, Nina, but essentially, what we found was everyone was on a very similar career path, which, would be very easy for us to end up, talking to people in exactly the same way. But as they navigate that career path, they're all doing it in their slightly different way. And if we look at onboarding, for example, with navigators, we lead with guidance, i.e. here's a step-by-step path on how you navigate yourself into your career. Whereas for balance seekers, we lead with a mission. They want to know how we're fighting for their profession. It's the same journey stage, but a very, very different message. Then if you're looking at someone who's, we would describe as a climber, we're showing, right, this is where, this is the next route to the next level up. This is where you're going. You're incredibly determined, and you can keep moving forwards. Whereas with the ever curious, we want to lead with the opportunity for peer discussions and emerging tech and all the latest what is coming up in the optometry space.
Yep, exactly. And then following the alignment with the segments and personas, we then agreed on a face-to-face segmentation workshop with Stuart and his key team. And the goal was here to get everyone to familiarize themselves with segments and work with them in a group setting. So we really did some concrete work and jobs there. So we had 14 people attending, and the whole workshop ran for 5.5 hours with a nice lunch break, of course. and we did 4 group exercises during that day.
Yeah, this was really, it was really powerful and really useful to build buy-in across the business. We walked through each persona in a lot of detail, and then what you actually started to see was people were connecting with these personas, with these these archetypical members that we could see, and they said they could recognize segments from their own conversations with members, and that that's where you have that real aha moment where people go, do you know what? I was on the phone to someone the other day who I would say is definitely a climber. And so you actually, you know, it shows that, you know, kind of all this research is really just grounded in truth. And, you know, that's where you really get that buy-in from top to bottom of the organization. So yeah, it was a really critical day. And, you know, that's with, you know, getting the right stakeholders around the table, including, you know, senior leadership. That's where we really started to get that buy-in for the work that we were doing. And then, you know, kind of moving forwards, but, you know, kind of that's only half the that's only half the battle. So where the execution becomes, you know, a challenge is, you know, kind of where these start to really become real. And we have the segmentation, but now what we're being asked to do is effectively roll out 4 versions of everything, you know. And, you know, when we look at an illustration, what you see is, you know, this execution gap. You know, we're all really excited at the beginning. We'll, you know, kind of, we want to go out, we want to start delivering them, but then we hit the now what, because actually it's a really terrifying moment. You've made this significant investment. You've got a deck of 100 pages. Your leadership team are eager to see what happens. Your CFO is, you know, wanting you to explain why you spent this money and, you know, kind of what he's going to, or what they're going to see for their return. And, you know, it is tricky to go from theory into practice because, you know, we've all got small teams. And we're already essentially asking very stretched departments to start scaling up their content creation and make multiple versions of communications. And it can be incredibly overwhelming. So that's when, you know, things can fail and it will default back to a one-size-fits-all approach. And then unfortunately that deck will go into a bin. But, you know, what was been the game changer in the certainly in the past few years now is if we can start to apply AI to these segments, it speeds up these processes. It takes away a lot of that heavy lifting, and we can start to put them into everyday use. You know, we still had a capacity problem, and each of the personas needed different content. You know, that is still 4 times the work, but what we were able to do is, you know, using the AI, it changed everything. So I think as an insight, if we look at a well-built persona profile, it's not just, you know, the beginning of a strategy document. It's also a structured data set. It contains motivations, language patterns, values, preferred channels, decision criteria, jobs to be done, you know, and that's exactly the kind of structured data an AI model can work with. And if we think of AI as huge data munching machines, they can take that information, and once you've got that model, because it is a model, it's anonymized data from the very start. So you're not even exposing any of your custom data or your member data to, you know, to the World Wide Web, or, you know, kind of wherever the data clouds of these AIs are held. And because you're using a model and not individual records, you're not running into any kind of GDPR issues or anything further than that. So that's exactly what we did. We took our persona profiles and other documents, such as our brand book and our tone of voice. We fed them into the project section of Claude, but you can do this in any other platform, you know, from Gemini using gems, or Copilot using agents, custom GPTs and ChatGPT. And we arrived at a custom chatbot, which had real data, which was specific to our members and our organization's needs. And now, you know, any team member can go in, describe a communication task, like write a renewal email for a climber, and the first draft they get back is genuinely informed by the research. There's no prompting or real expertise required, and the research becomes incredibly actionable very quickly. And it's not just a reference document that you know kind of sits in a pile somewhere.
Yeah, I think, you know, what you guys build here is essentially in kind of like what we call, maybe in our language, AI customer advisory board. So you know, it has the segment knowledge, but you can then chat with your segments instantly. So ask questions and then generate content variations and test messaging angles. And the beauty here is that it's not a random set of trained data. It's actually grounded on your real segments, and it scales. So you don't need a big team to kind of execute personalized communication messages or product concepts and no one, because you have this system.
Yeah, and the results they're starting to show. So our lapsed member campaign we used as a testing ground, which is anyone knows trying to reactivate old customers or old leads is an incredibly difficult task to start with. But using this AI customer advisory board, and the data that we'd fed into it, we created very quickly 4 landing pages, one for each of the personas, 5 journeys, so one for each persona and those people who either didn't click an email or didn't, open an email, and then tailored communications, which were focused on all those member needs. And it was a sort of choose your own adventure style. So, it was a little bit crude, but working with first click attribution, we were able to start moving people down different journey pathways. But what it meant was suddenly a small team, 2 people, were able to work with the AI to evaluate and iterate clean copy that could be used across the campaign. And then, as we progressed, we were able to take screenshots of Google Analytics, heat maps from our emails, really use that multimodal function in the AI, feed them back in, and where we could see things weren't quite working, we could make those very quick tactical changes on the fly. And what would have taken weeks for 2 of us to deliver, that could be created and actioned in minutes. And the campaign has delivered a 10% year-on-year increase, and we're still seeing those numbers going up. So, incredibly successful. But again, it's important. I see AIs as interns. They can go a little bit wrong. They don't often hit the mark, but that's where that evaluation and iteration is probably one of the most important things you can do. Don't just take what it spits out as rote, but work with it, feedback, and it will improve. And then what's really great is kind of what we're seeing here is this isn't magic, but it's really great work which is built on fantastic data. And I think with any data model that we've that you use in the past, and it's a consistent theme, this maximum of garbage in, garbage out. If we put in really poor quality data, then we're going to get poor results. The AI is not a miracle worker. So having this fantastically strong data set, these personas really drove things forwards, because the AI only knows what you've told it. It can produce incredible content, but it can't discover anything you haven't yet researched. It can't tell you if your members' needs have shifted. For that you do need that continuous dialogue with real people. And that's the point that I think Ville is going to talk about next.
Yeah, I think everyone is trying to figure out, like, okay, where does the real conversation with customers and customer insight, what's that relation to AI, or can we just jump the real customers and just use the AI only? And I think the truth is sort of a hybrid, and we need to examine it carefully. Like you said, you can use AI for something, but generating new innovations, new insights, that's not where the AI is. So AI really excels at volume, speed, and consistency, and that kind of fast iteration loops. Once you have your solid data sets there, so you can build variations in minutes. And like you were saying, Stuart, then it fills the empty document with initial ideas, and then you can keep iterating from there. So it's not the point that you blindly believe in the copy or the messaging or the concepts that the AI generates, but it kind of gives you a fantastic start. But the reality is that AI simply cannot discover new needs. It cannot detect the segment's priorities if they are shifting. You can't surface the emotional nuances that you don't have in the data set. And it, something that it doesn't build trust with real customers if you just start talking to your AI customers. So there is that kind of relationship aspect as well. So in other words, AI exploits the existing knowledge at speed, but the new understanding really requires that real customer dialogue. So that's not going anywhere. But the story doesn't really end there with the AI advisory board. So you need to keep the real customers in the loop and connect it with AI, a little bit like what you have done here. And that's something that we are building next at Leanlab, and I'll give you a sneak preview on the combo of having a real customer dialogue and then the AI layer on top, and then how you're able to chat with your customer segments. But before I go there, let's do a really quick poll on, some of you guys say that you have done the needs-based segmentation. So what are your challenges with the segmentation that you have right now? The poll is live, so the answer options are creating the segments, putting the teams to use them, keeping segments up to date, scaling personalized content. Not many of you guys had actually done that, so we didn't get many responses here. But what we're seeing is creating the segments in the first place is the real challenge, and then obviously getting the teams to actually use them. So very similar experience that you guys had, Stuart, when we started talking about this. Let's look at a little bit on the future, how it might look like when you start combining the real customer lab or advisory board with the AI layer. So this is kind of what we're working on next. On the left, you can see our existing platform, the Digital Customer Advisory Board, Customer Lab. So real customers, real dialogue. You invite customers there as your advisors for long term. Can be very qualitative, with like what the college did with 50 members, but they can span to 500,000, several thousand members. So that acts as a base layer or as a kind of a generator, if you think, for new understanding and something that AI is unable to do. And then on the right, you can see the AI Customer Advisory Board that we're working on. So it kind of takes the energy from the real customers and then turns that energy into content, campaigns, and concepts at speed. So exactly what Stuart has been doing, but in an automated fashion. And today the connection is often manual, so you need to then maintain the Claude instance and add manually new details there, and add details to your personas. But the AI, and then the AI gets better, and that's kind of what Stuart showed you earlier. But I believe that the future is kind of a more native connection between these two. So it's a continuous ongoing iteration between these two layers, the base layer as a generator, and then the kind of the light bulb of the advisory board where you can test or create campaigns and ideas based on real knowledge. So that's what we're working on right now. So kind of the insight that you're surfacing on Monday with your real customers is already usable for the Tuesday's campaign draft. So the system compounds, and every cycle makes the AI board smarter. So let me show you a quick example how this looks like. So imagine that you're working on your churn, and your analytics flags a problem with the 90-day churn. It's peaking within a certain segment, 3 times above the average, whatever. And when you look at the CRM data, obviously it doesn't explain why, because of the before discussed reasons. So the default assumption is that, hey, maybe they didn't see value, so your team might send out a discount, or will we miss you email, but nothing really moves. But when you then take this challenge to the customer advisory board and ask the question from that segment, then you might get a completely different answer. You get an answer maybe that, hey, I really like the product, but I was on my own and nobody really showed what to do next, so that's why I stopped. So you can see it's not a value problem per se; it's more of a guidance problem. And only the real dialogue then surface this, and it's certainly something that the data doesn't show you. Then what you can then do with this sort of a combo of these 2 layers is then the AI board gets updated automatically with that new segment information. Hey, the post-onboarding churn is not due to lack of value for this segment, but it's lack of guidance, right? And then your AI board picks that piece of information automatically, and then you just generate a re-engagement sequence for this particular segment. So now, instead of saying, hey, we miss you, here's a 20% off or whatever discount or whatever you have kind of defaulted originally, you can produce sort of a 30, 60, 90-day nurture flow, matching this piece of information, that it's not the price, it's the guidance. So now you can say, hey, 3 features matched your goals. This is your progress so far. So it becomes more proactive, guiding, and much more personal. So this is, I think, the future for research and how it kind of connects the dot with the AI. And obviously the result of this type of activity is like what Stuart said, is in this case the churn would drop because you would essentially be able to communicate with your customers effectively. You don't need to spend money on win-back discounts. You just tweak the messaging. So that's the pattern. That's kind of what we're seeing. The data tells you something is wrong. Real customers tell you why. And then AI helps you to turn that action overnight. And I think that's the future that we're now looking at, between the real customer dialogue and then the AI. Cool. Let's do a quick wrap up on the key takeaways. So if I bring this together, first, if we start from jobs to be done, so start from there, not demographics. Needs-based segmentation really predicts behavior far better than the age or job title or a purchase. And if your segmentation is demographic, that's your first gap to close to kind of move up in that pyramid.
Yeah, that was certainly our case. We had really thin data to work with, and we just needed something much more tangible to start progressing with.
Yeah. And then I think what Stuart was making here, a fantastic example in terms of making it operational. You obviously need to jump through the hoops of creating the real customer data segments, as Nina explained, with qual and quant. So you need to do the kind of upfront work, but then the digital advisory board kind of gives you wings. It helps you to really quickly fill that white space with campaign ideas, concepts, and so on, grounded on the real system.
Yeah, and the AI model itself doesn't actually need to house any personal data. You can work with all that great aggregated data to start getting some fast results.
Yeah, and I think lastly, the segmentation maybe have been the treat for big enterprises before age of AI because it required big teams to actually put it into operations. But as Stuart was sharing this example, is that, you know, relatively small marketing and product teams can actually swing this into action. You know, you produce the lapsed member campaign with 2 people in a jiffy. So the tools are there, and these same principles, although this is a kind of a membership case, they work in any industry, you know, membership organizations, SaaS, retail, financial, because it's the jobs to be done framework that is connecting the dots across all the industries.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it was about, you know, the whole point was being able to make the segmentation really operational and, you know, approachable by our team.
Very good. Let's progress towards the Q&A. Before we jump there, if you're interested, kind of digging deeper into where you currently are and how you could progress towards the jobs to be done framework and kind of swing the segmentation work into operations, then you know, feel free to reach out to me or Nina. And I think there's a calendar link in the chat window if you want to book a meeting with me. But we can do a quick conversation just to understand where you are and whether this sort of a thing would be a fit for you guys. Q&A. Let's start looking at what questions we have. I haven't been able to go into the Q&A box, but I do it right now. So we have a few minutes. Are you guys looking at the Q&A box yourself? Anything that pops out? There is Lena is asking a quite interesting question, that is that they have needs-based system, but the challenge is then plotting the system back into the kind of original data set. Like, how can we figure out which customer fit in which file? And I think this is something that we discussed as well, you know, when we were collaborating on with Stuart on this case. I think one option isn't it so neat that you can kind of create based on the segmentation, you can create a sort of a simplified segmentation kind of questionnaire, and when you have new customers or you kind of gather information from them, you just kind of take them through kind of like maybe like a personalization campaign, like, hey, we want to work more closely with you. You know, which of these sort of archetypes fits your style, and they can be mapped with questions. Do you have any thoughts on that, Nina or Stuart?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. There are few approaches. It is quite typical. It is that you design a typing questions or golden questions, some 6 or 10 questions that can predict which persona someone is probably belonging to. So you can embed this in onboarding, as you said, and in CRM capture or in welcoming survey or newsletters or so forth. But it's really important to understand that this kind of segmentation is not like, it's a model. It doesn't mean that every single member or respondent or your client belongs exactly to one segment. It's like it's more like a
approximation,
or a group of people. So it's not like now Mary is always in segment 1 or Dan is always in the segment number 3. So you have to like treat it as a model, not an exact perfect grouping of people.
Yeah, and yeah, just to add to that, I think you know, the first of all, I would always keep your kind of any personas or, you know, whatever you name people internal to the business. I would never let customers see that you're you're naming them in a particular bucket just because it's kind of I don't think people really relate to that particularly well, but you know, in terms of where they sit, you know, I described it as sort of taking 4 pebbles, throwing them into a lake, and you know, those ripples, people just kind of, if the pebble is the archetypical persona, then, you know, kind of each of those, as they ripple, you know, as those ripples out, it depends how kind of close or away from the center that person might be, and they, you know, like a Venn diagram, they sort of, you know, kind of drift in and out. So they're going to have elements of various parts of persona around them.
Yeah, sort of healthy level of bipolarity in each.
Yeah, or quad, you know, kind of.
Yes, yeah. In your case, yes. I think Elise and Martin were asking about the sort of how fluid these segments are over time. So any thoughts on that? Maybe it's a question for you, Nina, because you've been doing all this segmentation work.
Yeah, I think Stuart already answered a bit to these questions. So maybe in this case, when the members have relation to the college, it's quite a narrow, in a way, it's quite a narrow theme or frame we are dealing with. They may be quite fixed because they are related to their profession, their way of thinking, how they learn, and so forth. But for instance, if we are dealing with segments related to food or environment or like bigger issues, they may change quite a lot during people's life stages and age, and depending on what happens globally and so forth. And those can be more ambivalent than this in this case, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's critical that the jobs to be done are not necessarily kind of just passing life stages, but they are more permanent attitudes that don't change over time. So nailing that right flight plane is key. So then you don't have like switching segments. So for example, if you do it on purchase behavior, then your purchase behavior might change. You know, you run out of cash to splash, so then you spend less.
Yep.
But you still have a taste for premium goods. You know, if you had the cash. So the underlying attitude is there. But yeah, it's something that some of the segmentation work that I've done in the past when I was a consultant, we run the kind of the segmentation in every few years and see if it sort of changed. So that can be done if it's a more fluid segment and which is more driven by kind of life events and so on. Cool. One more question. We have 1 minute. Lizzie was asking, I think this is a question for you, Stuart. Do you think it's important to create newsletters for each persona? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we don't have a particularly sophisticated CRM that allows us to kind of, you know, and bucket people into different personas, and it's not really something that we're going to pursue. But what we try and do is make sure that within those newsletters we capture those four key points. So you know, at the moment we're promoting a large scale conference, and what we'll make sure we do is within, you know, the messaging, make sure that we've got, you know, content which is directed at each of those four personas, because people self-select when they, you know, we all scan emails, we all scan, you know, messages that come to us. And I think that like a great example is if you get an email off Nike or Adidas or whoever that might be, they'll always send you men's shoes and women's shoes, because they know you're going to, whichever market you're in, whether you're in the market to buy men's shoes today or you're in the market to buy women's shoes, you're going to be clicking on one of those. And so there is that self-selection criteria, I scan it, I see that there's the latest, so when we're promoting our conference, I see there's the latest technology. I see that there's the, latest way that I can advance my career. I see something about, how I can navigate my career path. And I recognize the bit that's relevant to me, and I suddenly go, okay, I'm just going to read that bit. I kind of disregard the other content, and that's where I start to go. So, yeah, it's because it's incredibly difficult to actually pinpoint who those people are. We tried to do it in the Lapsed Member campaign when we went with first click attribution, but I would say you better kind of staying broad, but being very kind of targeted within the messaging itself.
Yeah, and you can have like different hooks.
Yeah.
Very cool. I think that's what we had time for. So really appreciate everyone joining for the session today. Huge thanks to you, Stuart and Nina, for helping me to put the presentation together. The recording will be shared with all the registrants, so you'll be able to distribute it internally if you teams like to take a closer look. And feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to know more. Thank you, Stuart and Nina, everyone.
Thanks
Have a great day. Cheers. Bye.
Yes.
Bye.